Everyone for being here. This is a great turnout. I am Nafili Barrett. I am the chair of the Mendocino Council of Governments, and I think most of you are familiar with the project. But for those of you that aren't or that aren't familiar with MCOG, we are the Regional Transportation Planning Agency for the Mendocino County region. And we launched this project with funding from a Caltrans grant to look at mobility alternatives in select communities of inland Mendocino County that are not currently served by regular fixed route transit. So we have partnered with AMA Transportation to conduct this study for us, and we're sort of in the late stages of the study, and we're going to hear about their recommendations today. Before I hand it over to them, I also want to mention Loretta Ellard from MCOG is also on the meeting. She's been the MCOG staff lead on this project, and we do have two MCOG board members joining us as well. I see John Haschak and Mike Carter. So thank you all for being here. And with that, I will hand it over. Oh, and I'm sorry, Jesus Rodriguez, also on MCOG staff, is here and can provide translation services if needed. And with that, I will hand it over to Heather Menninger with AMA to take us through the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Nafili. And I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues, Selena Barlow and Valerie McIntosh, who will be sharing in the process of what we have to bring to you today. Thank you so much to each of you for participating. We realize that this may not be at the top of your list of concerns, but joining us for this bit of time, and importantly for the conversation at the end, is what we're very much looking forward to. Our agenda this afternoon, this early evening, is pretty straightforward. We'll have a few comments. Selena, if we can move to the agenda slide, a few comments on the purposes of the study and how we went about it, the AMA Transit Planning team. We will review what we heard from the 5 communities of focus. Again, this is a repeat for some of you that have been with us through the long haul, but it lays a really important foundation to the recommendations that we'll be sharing. And then Selena and I will be talking about the proposed Lifeline services, a 2-part package that we're bringing to the fore for comment, for reaction, before we shape it into final recommendations. And it is around that shaping process that we look forward to your comments in the discussion section that will follow our presentation. So moving to the next slide of why and how this study has come about. As Nafili indicated, we were focused on rural communities within the inland corridor along the 101 freeway that didn't have significant public transit or any public transportation. And we understand that part of what we're about is to determine the feasibility of services. That's right in the title of the study effort, because these are hard to serve areas because of distance, because of the size, the small scale of the communities, because of the terrain over which people need to travel. So solutions are not necessarily easy, and similarly, not necessarily inexpensive. So what is feasible to implement that will make a difference? Finally, we recognize that in addition to these 5 communities, there are other areas of Mendocino County that are not on the Mendocino Transit Authority footprint that may have similar kinds of issues. So the hope was that in some way this study's effort could spill over to them. So moving to the next slide, in terms of why this study at this time, MCOG recognized that it had multiple years of unmet transit need testimony, documenting, reporting long-standing kinds of needs of these very distant rural geographies, communities needing to get into services and so forth in Ukiah, Willits, and elsewhere. So recognizing those long-standing needs were part of the motivation. Similarly, to find innovative solutions that would help address these hard-to-serve needs. They are difficult to meet. So what else can we do that can try and make a difference, getting people to where they need to go? And finally, it was important to MCOG and to the Caltrans funding source, the community sustainability program, that we do a community needs focus, that it come from the community up, and that be important to our orientation and understanding needs. It's wonderful we're having so many people. Welcome to everyone. We've just gone ahead and gotten started, so I hope you'll be able to follow along. Moving to the next slide, we wanted to think just a bit about what is innovation. I've referred to these hard to serve trip needs. What could be an innovative solution in addressing them? That was important in the grant offering and has been an important part of how we thought about it. So clearly innovation means beyond the traditional public transit, that large 40-foot bus that's making recurring trips on multiple days. It probably means multiple modes, different types of vehicles, different types of services, maybe even one trip using a couple of different modes. It means that innovation means that we find low-cost ways of doing this, because as we've indicated, we can't afford some of the high-cost expenses to go beyond the network that already exists. It means finding something that is sustainable, because that, of course, is the critical issue. We can't just put something out there in a short-term way. We want to find something that can be sustained and carried on over time. And finally, I think very importantly, it means involving community partners. These geographically distant mobility needs, these small communities with trips that are long and few people will ride, are not the responsibility of any single entity. They're not the sole responsibility of MTA. So if we're going to meet these needs in an innovative way that can be sustained, it's going to take a partnership approach to do so. So moving to the next slide, part of our study effort, as I indicated, was to really listen to the communities themselves, understand what was unique about each of them in terms of mobility needs, where there were similarities, how we might address those needs in innovative ways. The gold stars on this map of our approach reflect the numerous times in which we touched community members, beginning with listening sessions almost a year ago now, an e-survey in the fall that with other research led into those first two study products of volume 1 and 2, the transportation needs assessment and the feasibility analysis. We then began additional series of rounds of conversations with the community members, stakeholders, and others that responded to our initial shaping of recommendations and helped us kind of further refine and develop those. And that's what we're bringing to you today in this June public meeting. So part of the reason for this extensive approach, it had three key objectives to our thinking. One was to develop that rich, individualized picture of need that I talk about. How is each community unique and what are its characteristics of mobility need? Secondly, to test community preferences. What did people think would work for them or not work for them at the community level? And then thirdly, perhaps most importantly, as we go beyond this study, how can we build support for what comes next? How can we ensure that people will find their way to these services and then use them? Because if they don't, the services won't be able to be continued. So part of this effort to reach community members was very much towards building support for what might get implemented down the road. So at this stage, then, I'd like to turn it back to Selena to talk about what we heard and how that helps shape what we're bringing to you today.
Okay, I'd like to begin by quickly recapping what we heard in our listening sessions with stakeholders and community members. As Heather said, it was almost a year ago we had those conversations in person in each of the communities, and we had a chance to tour the communities and get to know them a little bit in that process. What we heard in Laytonville and Covelo, which are the most remote of the 5 communities, was primarily about the need to get to Ukiah, to get there for affordable grocery shopping, to get there for social service appointments, to get there for medical appointments that are beyond the kind of routine care that people could get at the local clinics. And we particularly heard about the need for OBGYN care, which is available only in Ukiah within Mendocino County. In Potter Valley, we heard really similar things: a need to travel to Ukiah for all of those purposes, shopping, services, medical appointments. And while Potter Valley is a lot less remote than Covelo and Laytonville, it actually has fewer services. There's no grocery store and no clinic in Potter Valley, so people orient entirely into Ukiah. Now, Brooktrails and Hopland are distinctly different from the first 3 communities, both in terms of their proximity to MTA and their needs. Brooktrails, of course, is a suburban community just outside of Willits, and it's connected to Willits by a single roadway, which is only accessible through in a vehicle. You can't bike or walk on it. And therefore, young people and adults without cars have a real need to get into Willits for school-related activities, for services, for basic needs, and to connect to the MTA to get for longer trips. Hopland is both a residential community and a work destination. Residents need to travel to Ukiah for all of the reasons out in the other communities. For example, you can buy a lot of wine in Hopland, but you can't buy groceries there. So people need to get into Ukiah just for basic shopping. But it's also a focus of employment in the area. And a lot of employees live in Ukiah and need to get to Hopland for the jobs in the wineries and the restaurants there. Those are the community specific needs. There were also some things that we heard about that were across the county. One of those was the needs of college students to make trips to the two Mendocino College campuses in Willits and Ukiah. Students living in outlying communities often couldn't afford the gas to make the regular drive in or didn't have a reliable vehicle. We also heard about out-of-county trips, primarily among older adults, the need to travel out of county for specialty medical appointments. Now, these were really focused on Santa Rosa, but we also heard about needs that went beyond that to more far-flung locations. So from the listening sessions, we began to formulate potential mobility solutions to meet the expressed needs. We didn't go in thinking, oh, this is what we're going to recommend. We went in listening, and then out of that listening came potential solutions. And these we tested in an e-survey, which local stakeholders, some of which are on this call, helped us to promote. And we had about 270 community members that participated in the survey. Now, the survey tested several potential mobility options in each community, and so they were specific to the community. And these range from shuttles that would get people into Ukiah from the remote communities, to mileage reimbursement and rideshare programs that would allow people to share rides with other people and perhaps pay for them, to expansion of existing transportation services. So we tested sort of a range of things. And we asked people for each of those things to say how useful each service would be and which of the services would be most useful to them. And we came out with some really clear preferences. In Covelo, Laytonville, and Potter Valley, the clear preference was for some kind of shuttle that would get them into Ukiah at least one day a week. In Brooktrails, the preference was for some kind of regular service and that would connect them to the MTA in Willits, something that would traverse that road that you can only traverse in a vehicle, but do it on a fairly regular basis. And then finally, in Hopland, the respondents were divided among folks that wanted a shuttle that would get them into Ukiah and folks that wanted work transportation from Ukiah into Hopland. So there was sort of a dual market there. So once we had these findings, once we had the survey results, we did two things. We went back to the stakeholders. Again, many of you were on those calls in each community to talk about the viability and the attractiveness of the identified solutions and just how reasonable they were. And then our associate Cliff also conducted research to evaluate the cost, available funding, and the feasibility of each of the solutions. So these efforts resulted in some modifications to this menu of possibilities. And what those modifications included were, first of all, these volunteer driver mileage reimbursement and community ride board options. They weren't preferred solutions. They're not in yellow here, but they were judged to be useful by a fairly large segment of our respondents. And they offer a number of advantages. They're low cost to implement. They meet the need for those long distance medical trips that are pretty hard to meet any other way. And there is funding available to implement these sorts of programs through the FTA 5310 funding for seniors and persons with disabilities. So they were retained in our mix of solutions because they seem like good, viable solutions, not for everyone, but for some members of the public. Second, the app-based car share wasn't a preferred option for very many people, as you can see here. And in addition, there were a number of feasibility problems to implementing it. So we basically dropped it from consideration. And then finally, the option down here that folks in Ukiah wanted to be able to get to Hopland and wanted perhaps a van pool type service to do that. That type of service was judged to be just prohibitively expensive, and there was no funding source for it. And so we decided instead to focus on the needs of the folks that live in Hopland and need to get into Ukiah. So with those adjustments to our menu of possibility, we began to work on formulating a rural mobility vision for rural Mendocino County, something that would be the recommendation of our plan, and particularly for the 5 study communities. Now, we began with the recognition that whatever we proposed might need to draw on some of its funding from local transportation funds, which are used by the MTA. Therefore, we needed to balance in our minds the mobility needs of persons in more densely populated areas, which are the focus of MTA service, with those living in rural communities. So looking at the population in Mendocino County, about 56% of the county's population lives within a 1.5 miles of an MTA bus stop. 40% live outside of that range. They live more than a 1.5 miles from an MTA bus stop. The focus of our study was on finding local solutions that would provide some level of service to some of the 1,000 people that are not currently served by MTA. During our outreach for this project, it became immediately clear that there was not going to be a single strategy that would suffice. The needs were diverse among the various communities, but they were also diverse within the communities, with different population segments needing different kinds of things. So we knew that we were going to need to recommend a mix of services. The second thing we knew right from the start is that finding sustainable funding was going to be difficult, and it would be a critical challenge. And it has been. We've gone through a number of iterations of this project and these recommendations as we have tried to find recommendations that would be fundable. But equally important is identifying leadership for this effort, because as Heather said at the beginning, it's really, rural mobility is really not anybody's primary job. It's not the MTAs. They're interested in the more urbanized or more populated areas. MCOG is a planning agency, and there are a variety of community-based organizations whose focus is rural communities, like the Family Resource Network, but they're not transportation agencies. So we feel like it is going to take a coalition of all of these organizations in order to implement, promote, and manage the service. They're all going to need to play a role in bringing it about. And then finally, Loretta and Nefili kept reminding us, as Heather said, that Mendocino County has other communities without transportation, and we needed to look at how the recommendations we're making here could go beyond our 5 communities. So with that said, we'd like to propose a 2-part package of lifeline service to meet some of the Mendocino County's rural mobility needs. And the first part of this package is vehicle-based services. In Laytonville and Covelo, we are recommending the establishment of a hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle. And what that means is it would be a shuttle bus that would run 1 day per week from each of the 2 communities. It would begin service in the home community in a dial-a-ride mode. That means it would go around and pick people up who'd made a reservation at their homes. It would then make 1 single stop in the middle of the community for people that didn't have a reservation, who would ride on a space available basis. And then it would go directly to Ukiah. Once it was in Ukiah, it would circulate around, drop people at the places they needed to go, whether it's medical clinics or shopping centers or wherever they need to go. They've let the driver know. The driver makes a little route in Ukiah and drops them off and lets them know when he or she will be back to pick them up. So a few hours later, the shuttle retraces its step, picks everyone up, and takes them back to the home community where they are dropped back off at their homes or wherever they boarded the bus. The key to this service design, and the reason that we've designed it the way we have, is that it overcomes many of the barriers that people have to using rural buses. And we've seen this in lots of communities, so we have experience with this. We hear things like, well, I can't get to the bus stop, it's too far away. Or I'm anxious about or unable to transfer buses, that's just too scary. I'm worried that I'll miss the bus that needs to get me back home and I won't get back home, and then I'm stuck somewhere for the night and I'm in quite a long way from where I live. This one-seat ride removes those barriers and gives people the confidence that they're going to get where they're going and they're going to get back home. And they're going to be able to achieve the things they need to achieve while they're there. Potter Valley is a smaller community and somewhat less remote than Covelo and Laytonville. And in addition, there, the Family Resource Center has an existing vehicle that's not being used due to lack of funding for insurance and gas. We are recommending initial funding support for the FRC to operate a community shuttle using the existing vehicle. It would be modest support. It would simply be money for insurance and gas, but hopefully it would allow them to begin to provide some kind of transportation service in the community. And then after a year, we would evaluate the potential for hybrid dial-a-ride service similar to what I've described in Covelo and Laytonville. Now, Brooktrails, as I mentioned before, Brooktrails and Hopland are both within the MTA's service footprint. They're proximate to MTA service. And what we are recommending is that their needs be addressed through the short-range transit plan, which is currently under development. Right now, MTA is going through outreach for a plan that would be implemented in about a year. For Brooktrails, we're recommending that the MTA consider establishing a 2-day-a-week service between Brooktrails and Willits. It would be a deviated fixed route. And what that means is that the route might have 3 scheduled stops in Brooktrails, and then it might have time in the schedule to pick up 1 or 2 people who have made reservations and go off route to pick them up at their home. Would then go to Willits, where people would be able to go to local destinations or transfer to MTA routes for longer trips. In Hopland is actually served by the MTA's Route 65, but during COVID, that service was cut back to where it is only 1 trip in each direction during the day. And because the morning trip is going south and the evening trip is coming north, it does not allow Hopland residents to use it to go into Ukiah. The SRTP will be reestablishing much of the service that was cut during COVID, and we are strongly recommending that the number of trips between Ukiah and Hopland be increased to a level that will serve the lifeline needs of residents getting into Ukiah and potentially some work trips from Ukiah to Hopland. So those are the vehicle-based services. Now, in addition, the second part of our package are other mobility programs, which leverage existing transportation, both private and specialized. The primary strategy would be a countywide volunteer driver mileage reimbursement program for older adults and persons with disabilities who live in rural areas. And the way the program works is folks enroll in it and are assigned a budget, and it then reimburses them for mileage so that it enables them to ask a family member or a neighbor for a ride and be able to pay that person for the cost, giving them the confidence to ask for help. A second strategy would serve the general population, particularly young adults. And this would be a series of local electronic ride boards, which would be set up in each of the target communities. The ride board would vet, the person administering the ride board would vet community members and then allow them to post rides and needs for rides. And the idea here is we heard in a lot of communities that, you know, people might have cars, but they don't have money for gas. And by allowing people to team up and share that cost, we think that some trips might be able to be made that otherwise wouldn't be affordable. And then a final strategy under this package is something that's really critical to this entire effort, and that is communication. Initially, we proposed promoting the limited transportation services that exist. For example, the Medi-Cal transportation benefit is available to Medi-Cal members. The rural health clinics provide transportation for some patients. And the Senior Center Dial-A-Ride in Willits actually serves the Brooktrails area. And while these services are very limited and they're limited in who can use them, many of the residents who qualify are unaware of them. And so we think that communication can begin to have a little bit of impact even right away. And as new services are added, communication will be increasingly critical. So that is our vision for rural mobility in Mendocino County. Dial-A-Ride shuttle services from Covelo and Laytonville, potentially a Dial-A-Ride shuttle eventually from Potter Valley, but initially a community van. And then having the MTA expand its service a bit so that Brooktrails and Hopland are served in a reasonable manner. And then finally, a countywide volunteer driver mileage reimbursement program paired with community ride boards to help people share the transportation that they already have. So the next question is, how do we make this modest and yet still ambitious plan? How do we put it into action? So Heather.
Okay, thank you, Selena. So as Selena says, how can we realize this package of services? Who can operate and administer these services? And in fact, in relation to the vehicle-based services, several options exist for how we could go forward from here, specifically which community partners and what roles might they play in making these services happen. So first, I'm going to talk about option A, in which the MTA would be the operator of the vehicle-based services, given its institutional knowledge, its mission for providing public transportation over Mendocino County's distances, its terrain, and the people who use its services generally. So MTA would operate the hybrid Dial-A-Ride shuttles, initially from Covelo and Laytonville, perhaps if demand presents also from Potter Valley. Secondly, the Family Resource Center network is proposed for promoting and marketing the hybrid Dial-A-Ride services in the home communities where they would begin to pick up people. And we feel that that's really critical because there has to be a local connection to help people learn how to use this 1 day a week service, to think ahead and plan for that trip so that they set up the recurring appointment for OBGYN and so forth, or with a dentist in a way that they can use that shuttle to get there and to get home. So a promotion marketing role for the community-based organization. And then in terms of what Selena's been talking about, MTA using its short-range transit plan process to consider these recommendations for Brooktrails deviated fixed route service expansion and for Hopland's service scheduling improvements. MTA taking the lead in operating vehicles, Family Resource Center, critical lead role in promoting and marketing the new services. So that is option A. Now, option B suggests, option B would build upon contracting relationships of the sort that MTA has already had. You have innovation in the sense that Mendocino Transit Agency has been working with senior centers around the county in Willits, Ukiah, in Redwood Coast, South Coast, I believe Anderson Valley. So using that kind of model, MTA could contract for selected lifeline services that could be provided by the community-based organizations. So if one of those existing transportation services currently in place was able and willing to take on a vehicle-based service of the sort we're describing here, there could be a contractual relationship with MTA. So that's option B. The third and final option for vehicle-based services is frankly the one we started with. Some of you on this call may recall that we presented to the MTA board in April that MCOG designate a Rural Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, a CTSA, through which they could funnel a small proportion of the local transportation funds for the operation and administration of services. And we saw that as an important way to go because of this difficulty we've been talking about in finding leadership for rural transportation. It's no one one organization's responsibility. And so we started with the recommendation that a CTSA with that responsibility be created. However, given feedback from a variety of stakeholders and a variety of concerns surfacing, it became apparent that that's not the place to start, but instead to launch with option A, with MTA as operator, or through contract services option B. And then if MTA proves not willing or able to go forward with the rural mobility service package operating elements, then option C could be considered. So then looking at the other service package components, the other mobility programs, we see roles for MCOG and the community organization, Family Resource Center Network, securing funding. We've alluded to this 5310 money, which is on the street now, a grant application opening on June 15th for completed packages by the end of the summer, August 30th. So that opportunity to secure funding exists right now. We see for the other mobility programs, the administration of services by the community-based organization, again with funding from 5310. And we see also an important role for MCOG in providing oversight consistent with its oversight roles now, in evaluating this service package over time through reporting to its Social Services Transportation Advisory Council. They can be the eyes and ears of monitoring the implementation of the vision. So what are the activities over the next 3-year period? This presents actions related to option A. Again, we see that as likely the most feasible to start out with. The first year would entail acquiring a single vehicle for that Laytonville Covelo dial-a-ride shuttle and establishing an MTA operating plan and a marketing plan, presumably or possibly to be implemented by the Family Resource Center network. In the second year would be the actual implementation of the Laytonville Covelo hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle. The second year would see modest funding to that Potter Valley vehicle that Selena spoke to. And we would hope that MTA's consideration of services for Brooktrails and Hopland through its SRTP would be addressed during that second year. The third year for vehicle-based services would entail, importantly, monitoring ridership. If people don't use these services, they shouldn't continue. On the other hand, if they are using them at levels that are fairly modest, there will be a case made for expanding service. So in that case, that would be to add the Potter Valley hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle and to expand the Covelo Laytonville service to a second day per week per community. Again, assuming that there's sufficient performance and adequate funding. For those other services, the other programs we've been speaking about, again, MCOG working with the community-based organization to secure that funding. We feel very certain that Mendocino County will be successful in a 5310 application for 2 reasons. One, there's 40% more funding in that pot at Caltrans than there has been in the past because of federal infrastructure bill funding. And secondly, because we think this study is going to build a strong rationale for why and how you can go about meeting certain kinds of needs, certain markets, as Selena indicated, in this case, older adults and persons with disabilities. So that would be in the first year, presuming the funding is secured. The second year would see implementing that countywide volunteer driver mileage reimbursement for rural residents. It would also see implementation of the community ride boards and promoting existing transportation services with a small piece of funding pursued through the 5310 funding to support to provide stipends for managing these community ride boards. And then again, in the third year, that would be to monitor and adjust as indicated. I will note that the 5310 money is a several year cycle. So once you get into that cycle, it's highly likely to continue beyond the 2 to 3 years initially. So what will it cost? What will these cost? Again, we've worked to get these to be the lowest cost possible, but still be meaningful services. For the vehicle-based services, again, we're talking about that option A with MTA as the operator. And a vehicle will have to be secured, probably a Ford Transit van type vehicle, 8 to 10 passengers, lift equipped is very important. That's acquired for the shuttle for Covelo and Laytonville. $150,000 in that second year will support operations, everything associated with operating the hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle and the the Family Resource Center Network contract for marketing and promotion of the shuttle. It will also provide $15,000, we recommend, towards the Potter Valley Family Resource Center to contribute to the costs of its sedan for fuel and for insurance. Again, a contribution towards costs. During year 2, I've spoken to the importance of monitoring and evaluating towards the end of that year 2, so that by the 3rd year, an assessment can be made. Should we expand what we have in place? That would be about $340,000 to move to 2 days a week for each of the Covelo and Laytonville communities on the hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle, and to initiate 1 day a week for Potter Valley. Now, for the other services and programs, presuming that the 5310 funds can be secured, we're recommending an initial budget of $225,000 of 5310 funds. That would support older adults and seniors with disabilities, about 200 individuals. Each could be approved for 170 miles per month, which would certainly get them to out-of-town medical and back for a small number of trips, but significant. We also recommend putting aside $9,000 as a stipend per community, $150 per individual, per coordinator, $150 per month per community. So that adds up to $9,000. These individuals could help curate that perhaps Facebook type electronic ride board and be this initial portal of information about what existing transportation is out there and could be utilized by some people for some trips. And then there's a small modest growth factor in the year 3 for the other services and programs by about 4%. So those are the service components to bring it about, the dollars to realize it. Then we return to the issue of leadership and how we make this all happen. As we've been saying, we feel that that's really critical to realize the possibility, the opportunity that we can see. So starting with MCOG in its countywide planning roles, in its oversight role, the first decision will be that important one of the allocation and use of LTF funding at modest levels to help initiate some of these services. Importantly, MCOG must monitor and pursue other rural funding sources. At the top of that list is the Clean Mobility Options funding offered by the California Air Resource Board, and I've spoken about the FTA 5310 funding that's on the table now for application. So working with other partners to secure funding. In terms of operation, MTA will need to consider and determine whether it can and will operate services, whether it chooses to contract for vehicle-based services, and what role it wants to play around that. Similarly, the community-based organizations, particularly the Family Resource Center Network, need to determine if they can and will oversee a mileage reimbursement program, if they can work to identify community level coordinators for the ride board programs. And then another important but absolutely critical role, as Selena has spoken to, the role of communication, of promotion, of marketing. These are not simple or even intuitive services that we're talking about. They require a translator to let you know that A, they exist, and B, how you use them. Again, that 1 day a week trip, you need to plan ahead for. Maybe someone needs to help you think about that, but then can let you know that this shuttle exists and could get you there safely and back. So promoting, educating, communicating is absolutely critical. And we see that as being a primary responsibility of the community-based organizations because they are in the community, but shared with MCOG and MTA. Again, multiple players. So that brings us to the end. Oh, whoops, almost to the end. That important role of monitoring the rollout of the vision. We see that as an MCOG responsibility, and the opportunity to use the Social Service Transportation Advisory Council, which meets twice a year, receiving information about the initiation of services, about numbers of people riding, about how it's going, and being in a position to offer comment and feedback to the boards of directors of MCOG and MTA and to constituents about what's working and what's not, particularly in terms of whether or not services should expand. the action plan document, which will be the final product of this work effort, will talk about benchmarks and how we could help that SSTAC assessment of whether or not services are working. So that brings us then to the end of our formal presentation. You've been extremely patient, though we've muted you all, so you haven't had a choice. But now we would very much like to hear from you and get your comments, your reactions, your thoughts as to how this would work for you, for your neighbors, for family members, what thoughts this strikes in you. And what I would invite is if you would raise your hand if you have a comment, then Valerie will unmute you and we can have a conversation.
And you can also post in the chat if you prefer not to speak up.
That's
And
true.
I'm
Thank
going
you.
to unmute you, Patricia. Should have let you now.
Okay, am I unmuted?
We
You
can hear
are.
you, yes.
Well, hello, everyone. I apologize that I wasn't there. I just got out of a meeting at 5 o'clock and found out about this one. So I may have missed some important parts of the presentation, but what I gather is this more geared to health needs of older individuals, or what type of services during that one day are we really looking at planning for Covelo?
Selena, I'll let you speak to that since you
And
talked
you did
eloquently.
miss that part, Patricia. Actually, the hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle would be available for any type of trip need. The way it would work, it would pick people up in a dial-a-ride mode in Covelo or Laytonville, the home community, and then take them directly to Ukiah, where they could let the driver know where they needed to go, be it a shopping center, a medical appointment, or whatever. They would be dropped off at their specific destination with a note from the driver about when he or she would be back to pick them up. And then at the end of the day, they would pick them back up and take them back home to Covelo or Laytonville. So it would be available for any type of service. The key is that it would only operate one day a week. So people would need to plan their activities, their appointments around the day that the shuttle runs.
Understood. So when you say shuttle, does this mean there can be multiple persons for that one day?
Absolutely. This is an 8 to 10 passenger shuttle. So,
Oh, okay.
and it would be wheelchair accessible.
Okay. And do we know if it's a chosen day, a Monday through Friday? Is there one certain day yet?
To be,
We're not.
but we would probably ask the community if there was a preferred day.
Okay, and I don't mean to take up everyone's discussion, but so this is pretty much a presentation of an idea that we're trying to implement at this time. And maybe later there will be a voting or a thought we could actually community-based where we choose those things.
Well, that kind of part sort of happened early on. We had questions and we've met multiple times with communities to come down to the recommendations that we're making now. So we're kind of at, we've sort of been through a lot of different options, and these are the things that seem to gel the most with the community. And right now we're trying to figure out exactly how to get them implemented, where to get the funding, who's going to operate them, all of those pieces.
Okay, well, I am definitely just going to ponder some thoughts, and if there's information you would like to send out to Round Valley Indian tribes of what decisions have been made for our area, that would be very appreciative. So thank you for.
Patricia, I'm sorry if I gave that. No decisions have been made yet. This is what we, the consultants, are recommending. And the MCOG board will consider these at their meeting in August. Heather, that is August the
14th.
And that would be an opportunity that you could weigh in, but certainly we will be posting our proposed plan online. And Patricia, if you got the invitation to this meeting, then we'll make sure you also get an invitation to look at the proposed plan, and then you can provide comments on it.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you all for your time. So I definitely want to give others their chance.
But before we lose you, Patricia, Valerie, if you could put in the chat the link to the project website, because we did write a specific chapter, Patricia, about Covelo, about each of the 5 communities. And that reflects that feedback process that we participated in. So you may want to look at that and see if, you recognize what we learned.
Okay, I will definitely do that. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, information dense, like you said, very good presentation. Thank you. And you moved along through it beautifully. I appreciate the work that everybody's been doing on this. So I'm here representing public health today. I work on the coast and inland. And public health has been working to improve perinatal care in Mendocino County for women. So access to care is a big one. And you've probably heard some of the people that weighed in on those on the earlier surveys probably did weigh in on that. And I heard you say OBGYN services are part of our great need, unmet need in Mendocino County. And then the other part of our community health improvement plan, which I can share an outline with you, which I think you'd be interested in. Transportation is one of the key features that we need. Access to care as part of it, is for adolescent health. We also have unmet needs for adolescent health, which you've also been addressing. It sounds like, looking at the adolescents in Brooktrails and different communities, how they need to not be trying to be on some dangerous roads or get access to where they need to get. So those were a couple things that I wanted to share, and definitely will put my information in the chat. That public health, I'm working with Dr. Corin and our senior public health nurses on making sure that we've included community partners in our perinatal meetings or our adolescent health meetings, whether it's Office of Education, whoever it is. So this is part of this also. We're actually, really working on this, like really moving a large boulder right now uphill against some odds, but it's really important that we do this together. I contacted Lynn Scurry from Partnership Health Plan today because that has to do with managed care. And so when you're looking at, you were talking about other alternate means, they have transportation vouchers, pay and whatever, and you probably have that included in your study also. And if you don't, I can share a flyer that she shared with me today. I would have put it in the chat, but I couldn't see a way for me to put it in the chat.
That would be great if you can share that with us. And
okay, I'll put my email, and then if you need to contact me and I can share it that way, that'll be
And
possible
just
too.
a question to you, Donna, thinking about those OBGYN appointments or even the adolescent appointments, could you envision working with the clinical staff to try and make Covelo residents appointments on, say, Monday and Laytonville residents appointments on, say, Thursday, if we had this lifeline level but single day service in place?
Yes, that's been part of the discussion. It's kind of like if there are a few that are OB/GYN that they have a buddy system that they go together. So it's working with then the clinics and the providers care for her in Ukiah or wherever the provider that they're going to be seeing, which there aren't that many. So it's generally care for her for after 28 weeks, but there might be something building up through the hospital residency program that there might be more of a frontier type medicine occurring in the future as we envision it, like at Round Valley Indian Health Center or Consolidated Tribal Health, where there is no prenatal care right now. So it's kind of like we're looking at, really upstream interventions for health. So yeah, so together, same days, envisioning that. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Well, thank you. Other comments,
Sorry,
Valerie?
we have one chat question from Eileen asking if there's any chance of funding for an electric vehicle or electric shuttle.
Well, yes, Eileen, and we were so excited about that possibility early in this project that we scrambled to try and address it and seek that California Air Resource Board Clean Mobility Options funding because it gives 5 years of operating funding. What we ran into were the current limits of technology, that making the road from 101 up over to Covelo would exceed the range and capacity of the electric vehicle engines, my bad language. But it was more than could be expected of the vehicles. The range all the way from Covelo to Ukiah was too long a trip. So we need the technology to come along a little farther. The vehicle manufacturers told us they're working hard on doing so. So that's a very good question and a real hope for the future.
And Tess, I'm unmuting you now.
Looks like Tess has her hand up. Tess, you should be able to unmute now.
Unmute.
Oh, there she is.
She was briefly unmuted.
Your camera's on, but your microphone's not on.
Click on the little microphone icon.
There you go.
Unmute. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Yeah? Great. So Mike, I participated in a lot of these when I was on MCOG board, and I'm really excited that we've got a report out and that there's plans. My one concern, having worked for the state for 32 years, is that when you put dollars on these items and you apply, it's been my experience that they say, that's nice, but we'll give you this much. So how confident are you that these grants might actually be, they might take you seriously and say, okay, you've done your homework, this is what you need, you can have this much money to buy what you need. Otherwise, we're gonna all be crippled.
I can speak to the 5310 grant. I cannot speak to the other kinds of funding sources. For 5310, it's highly likely these funds have been capped at $400,000 per agency, per application. In the past, that cap has been lifted because there is this 40% increase in available funds. So that's why we came in at the $225,000 plus per year for the mileage reimbursement program for seniors and older adults, that one piece. So we feel very confident there. The issue of allocating small amounts of funding from the LTF is going to be a frankly difficult conversation with MCOG board and the MTA board, and that I don't know where that's going to come out. We worked very hard to present lowest cost possible kinds of services, hence the 1 day a week, to try and find something that could be affordable.
But Tess, those are local decisions. That's not funding that, you know, has to be applied for and come from somewhere else. Those are decisions that need to be made by the MTA and the MCOG board.
I see, but it sounded like you're going after grants, and that's what I'm worried about is when you put dollars on a grant, they give you what they want to give you.
The 5310 grant, that is correct. And as I said, we feel confident about those numbers.
Good, I'm glad. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tess.
Are there other
any
questions, comments, reactions? Shema, could I put you on the spot and invite you to make a comment?
I'm looking for Jama so I can unmute you. Sorry, Jama. Oh, there you are. Sorry. Okay, you should be able to unmute now.
Okay, looks like we're good now. Sure, I will weigh in. I just want to appreciate the work that's been done over the past year and truly appreciate the solicitation of information from those of us in the rural parts of the county, and especially the family resource centers, which I believe sometimes go unnoticed when it comes to potential partners in the county. So I just want to thank you for that. And I'll just express that what I've expressed in almost every meeting that I've attended, that our network of 8 family resource centers spread all throughout Mendocino County are always willing partners. We just need to figure out what works best for each of us. And I think what was presented this evening does make sense for a community like mine in Laytonville. So thank you.
And I thought I saw Brianna O'Neill came in at some point during the meeting. I don't know, Brianna, if you would be willing to comment on if you heard what we were proposing with regard to the Potter Valley Family Resource Center. Do you see her, Valerie, to unmute her?
You should be able to unmute now, Brianna.
Yes, I am. Thank you. Yeah, it definitely, I mean, transportation has always been a huge thing out in Potter Valley, and kind of like what was mentioned, we really don't have any amenities or anything out there. So I definitely think that this would be feasible. I think, really starting it up through our FRC and then being able to see what the needs exactly are. I think a dial-a-ride from there would be amazing. But yeah, it's just exciting to see something coming along. So thank you guys so much for all your hard work and really reaching out and being, the ears for our community. We really appreciate that.
Great, thank you. Jacob, could I put you on the spot as well and invite you to make a comment about, recognizing that from your MTA perspective, no decisions have been taken and much is still in flux with the short range transit plan. Could I invite you to make a comment?
I fully support that last comment that no plans have been made.
Okay, that's neutral, Jacob.
There you go.
But that, I think from your conversations with Cliff, you can see that the kind of operating of the hybrid dial-a-ride shuttle, Laytonville and Covelo, could be feasible. Would you agree to that?
I appreciate that Cliff took my comments and moved them towards the goal of getting these communities some transportation. And I think that's the most important thing, the biggest takeaway. The last person just talked, basically said, they'd like to investigate the needs. And I think it's really important. We all know what the needs are. We just got to find the funding and make this stuff happen. I like that the bar's been moved from the last meetings. It seems like we're on our way the right direction at this point, but I would say that there are no plans in the works.
Okay. And I think that you said in the last meeting that you've got public input on your short range transit plan process coming up later in July on Loretta, you told us July 27th at 4:30 at the Ukiah. Great. So maybe I see Julie Golden is on the call. Julie, I don't know if you came in at a point at which you could hear about our recognition of Hopland trip needs and how we move to where we move to on that.
No, I did hear that and I appreciate it. I've been on the call the whole time. My question is the funding. I know for you're calling it this short range plans or some more trips from MTA to Hopland. Would that 5130 grant or 5310 grant provide money to MTA to have more services, or is this a separate service?
The 5310 would not be an MTA service expansion funding source. It's just the mileage reimbursement. It's only older adults and people with disabilities. So it is limited.
What is the funding that we could do to boost up MTA services that we already have something in place? Where could you get more funding to provide MTA with more routes?
Well, that is the big conversation around its short range transit plan process, because there isn't automatically any additional funding. So how to divide up the pie that exists, or are there some other funding sources that can augment what's in place? And that's part of the MTA conversation going forward.
But so your mobility study and working with MCOG I just don't understand if you're putting MTA on the slide saying that they have to review and you have more routes, but then the funding source doesn't benefit them in any way. Isn't that odd?
Julie, Hopland is within MTA service footprint. In the past, you had more service that was cut back due to COVID. So one of the things that they're looking at in their SRTP that, Jacob can't commit to anything at this point, but is they're looking at reinstating service that they provided in the past. And if they do that, then Hopland would have additional trips connecting you to Ukiah. But that is the basic purpose of the LTF funding, is to provide that type of service. And so that funding source, already exists within the county. The new funding that, we were talking about bringing in would be for more specialized type of service, and which would be available to folks living in Hopland as well.
Nafili wants to make a comment. Valerie, Nafili.
Yep, I think I'm unmuted. So I just want to kind of follow up on Julie's question. So there's not new money, and this is conversation that's happening all over the state right now, because there's really an overall shortage of funding for transit operations. There's money out there to buy vehicles and do other things, but operation funding is definitely limited. This 5310 funding, it's federal funding, but it is specifically for transportation for elderly and disabled, or for very specific things. So just general public service, it can't fund, but the driver reimbursement for rides for the elderly and disabled is something that it can fund. So the short range transit plan that's been mentioned, that the workshop on July 27th is for, that's sort of a regular process that transit agencies go through, where they sort of look at all of the routes they're doing. They look for maybe to see if the routes are, if they're still needed, what the ridership is like on those. So it's possible that recommendations could come out of that plan to make changes. Maybe there's some change to another route that can be made that results in a cost savings that can then be used to fund, expansion of a different route somewhere else. So it's not ideal. Ideally, we would have more funding to bring into the county, but it's an opportunity to make changes where there's at least some service. So hopefully that helps clarify how those two things are tied in.
Sabrina Rodriguez, Valerie.
Yes, one moment, Sabrina, let me find you. There you are. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do appreciate that comment. I lived in Brooktrails for 20 years. I acknowledge that there's a issue with access to transportation in that community. But I also serve on MTA, and we are going to have some difficult conversations, because we know that the pot of money isn't going to increase. It's going to be more about shifting money and trying to figure out what services we essentially can give up, or ways that we can create cost savings so that we can provide additional services. So there's some hard decisions ahead for the organization.
Thank you. Other comments? So it's not easy, and there's no, clear way to make these hard decisions, but we believe that this study process is giving you some tools to look at these things clearly, and to try to, as Selena said, balance the rural with the more densely populated areas in terms of how can we meet some needs for some people for some trips. We have, maybe Selena, if you could, are there any other comments before I pull it back to a bit of closing?
I'm not seeing any.
Okay. So Selena, if you could pull it back to the closing, we're aiming to get to the to Loretta and Nephili for their careful review, a document that could be finalized and put up on the project website by the beginning of August. And Valerie, if you could invite people how they can make comments on that.
Sure, we have the website link here, bit.ly/MCOG mobility, and it's also linked in the chat. You can also access this project website from MCOG.org, from MCOG's website. We have several ways to engage there. We have a phone number, an email, and then we also have a map activity. I think some of you have done before earlier in the year, so where you can relate your needs or just provide a comment. We'll be posting the action plan when it's ready for review, and we'll let you all know how you can, we'll let you know that it's available and that you can comment on that.
And so Nephili has a comment to make, and I'm just going to say before I pass it over to her to end things, that we really appreciate your engagement, all that you're already each doing to help people in your communities do what they need to do. And we couldn't have gotten to where we did without the input from all of you. Thank you. Nephili?
Yeah, so thank you so much to Alma and everybody that was involved in this so far. And I do just want to mention, because I know it was asked earlier, when will a decision be made? And so we talked about this August MCOG board meeting. And so at that meeting, the MCOG board, they would accept this plan, but there would still be many decisions that have to be made and steps that have to be taken before any of these things can be implemented. So, that'll be sort of accepting the plan as saying, yes, these are great recommendations. Now we have to work with other agencies to move forward with how we're going to make those happen.
Okay. Well, I hope everyone has a grand evening and thank you for participating in democracy with a small d. We appreciate hearing from each of you and all that you each do. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.
Right.
Thank you.
And Valerie, you've captured the